Hi there and welcome to this video. This video supplements the Drystacked Construction Handbook. Information fully described in this book is further demonstrated through this video. Although this video was created in 2006 with lesser technology, the accuracy of the information still holds. So let's get this video on the road. Hi there and welcome to our video on how to apply surface bonding cement to your dry stacked block walls. Here's a picture of the sprayer I manufactured before I started my 31 foot by 51 foot garage. Notice the 1/8 bend elbow there. I glued the PVC tubes to the 1/8 bend elbow, but I did not glue the ends to the tubes. I used screws instead so it could be disassembled for cleaning and repair. This is the same sprayer after 80 bags of surface bonding cement has been passed through it. We're going to show a close-up here of the hopper end being removed. And that hopper end is just nothing more than a PVC cap sanded flat on the end and then screwed to the hopper. Then the PVC tube slides in and screws to the cap, and that's what assembles the neck of the hopper. The other end of the sprayer consists of a standard air sprayer nozzle, and you notice we have a plastic tube which connects the air sprayer all the way up to the other bucket end where the spray nozzles are actually located. The sprayer control valve is mounted to the PVC end cap with a large flat washer. As you can see here, I ground a flat spot on the end of the end cap so that I could use the sheet metal screw to attach the flat washer to the PVC end cap. The sprayer scoop end contains a spraying nozzle. Here you'll see a picture of two spraying nozzles. One was new and the other one was after 1 day's use. I found it's best to remove the spray nozzle each evening and take a drill and clear out the spray nozzle to get rid of the SBC that gets stuck inside the nozzle itself. And here we have a clean nozzle installed in the scoop bucket, ready for use once again. And last but not least, we need an air compressor to power the spray gun. Notice this is a 3.5 horsepower, 15-gallon Sears and Roebuck air compressor. I added a recoil reel on the end so that when you finish with the hose, you can just coil it up out of the way, move it to the next work location. So there you have it. These are the details about the sprayer that makes the job so much easier when you're applying the surface bonding cement. Here we have a picture of our bag hopper slide. This slide makes it very easy to drop the mixed bags and then open the bags on the slide and slide it into the mixer. This picture shows the slide with the saw blade. The saw blade ripped open the concrete bags, but it won't rip open these SBC bags because of the plastic inside. You also see the rubber flapper that connects the slide to the mixer when you slide the material out of the slide into the mixer. Here you can see the rubber flapper which carries the material from the slide all the way over into the mixer tub. This is necessary so when you flip the mixer up it doesn't hit the metal slide. And this little flapper works quite well. Now let's take a look at the slide in use. Here you can see my assistant preparing to mix up a bag of surface bonding cement. Notice the bags are on the trailer at the bottom of the picture, and he's putting on gloves. He should also have on his face mask, but it's a windy day today so he isn't wearing it. I highly recommend you always wear the face mask whether it's windy or not. Here he is dropping a bag onto the slider, and now he's opened up the bag. We'll see another picture of this in a moment. Detailed sprayer plans and pictures of all the equipment that we use can be located at our website, drystacked.com. This is our measuring bucket. Notice the little black mark inside the bucket. That's a 1 gallon mark. We like to keep it a little bit below 1 gallon. That way you can add a little bit more water if you need it. You can't remove water when you have too much. Here he's opening the plastic bag, the SBC bag. The bag has a plastic liner. It's a very thick plastic liner to keep moisture out. And it's hard to open, so we found laying on the tray like this, on the slide, cutting around 3 sides of the bag and peeling it open is the easiest way to get the material out. So once he gets it open, he tilts it over and dumps it out on the slide, and he takes a brush and brushes the material into the concrete mixer. That's the best way you found to open the bags, right? Yeah. As you can see, my assistant has taken his gloves off again, and he's working without gloves. We do not recommend working without gloves. The lye in the concrete is very hard on your skin. When your hands get damp or wet, then the lye goes into the pores and makes your skin very, very rough the next morning. So we recommend that you do wear gloves all the time you're handling the surface bonding cement in any one of its forms, either powder or the final mix. If you don't, then you will find out for yourself exactly what happens. The water has already been added to the mixer. Now we're just brushing in the remaining SBC mix, and once the mix is all brushed into the mixer, then he'll tilt the mixer over. We like to run the mixer on the other side of the pivot point. Makes it easier to work without the slide being in the way. So it's about time to flip over the mixer and get on with the mixing process. Here we will see the mixer running, and it's very important that the water be added before the mix. If you add the water after the mix, it turns into a big chunk, lumpy chunk, and you can't do anything with it. So you add the water first, slide in the mix, start up the mixer. It starts out a little bit lumpy, but as it turns, the lumps will thin out, and once in a while there'll be a few small lumps left. Whenever you run into the situation with a few small lumps that are left over, you stop the mixer, you break up those few lumps that you can find, and you also have to scrape out the mixer because sometimes the mix sticks on the walls of the mixer and doesn't mix properly. In other words, it clumps to the walls also. This mix right here is just a little bit on the thin side, and we'll show you a picture in a moment where the mix is a little bit on the thick side. So it's always a guessing game. Humidity, the actual moisture content inside the plastic bag, all affect the resulting mix thickness. You just have to learn that when the mix is wrong, you have to apply it differently, that's all. You can't keep throwing mix away. So in this case, this mix is thin. Because it's thin, what we'll have to do is, when I trowel it on the wall, once he sprays it to the wall, I'll have to press lightly on the trowel. Here is a mix that's a little bit too thick. I'm showing still pictures. You can see how it slides inside the mixer. And when it's too thick, then you have to push harder when you spread it around on the wall.
I'm just looking for lumps. Keep the mixture from over the sprayer from clogging up.
How do you know when it's the right thickness? Turn it towards the camera. Hard to follow.
This is not quite as runny as that. It sticks to the back of the trowel, it don't slide off.
That's just a little bit thick yet, right? Thin,
It is a little bit thin.
How long does it take to change studying out here like this?
About 15 minutes, 10 to 15 minutes.
How long do you think it's usable to spray it? I guess you just add more water, right?
Yeah.
If it's too thick.
It's too thick, add more water.
So like right now you said it's a little thin. When you think of the right thickness, how long will it take?
Probably 10 minutes, depending on
That
how much
long,
sun's
right now?
on it. The shade takes a little longer. Let it sit still, it hardens up a little, it stiffens up a little quicker.
Okay, here we have the typical spray sequence. 2 men working the wall makes it go quite rapidly. This whole video section right here is shown at 2 times normal speed, so the compressor sounds are abnormal, the sprayer sounds are abnormal. Notice how I was just picking out a chunk of something in the SBC material. When you're troweling across something, you'll feel it. It'll make a scratchy sound and you'll feel it. Just simply take the corner and flip that little piece out of there. It comes from the blocks or it comes from an unmixed clump in the SBC. So once you flip the piece out, you continue troweling. And the objective on the first troweling here is to get the SBC material uniform thickness and flat on the wall. You don't care about the surface quality at this time. Just get it uniform thickness and flat on the wall. Here I'm pushing material up. That's the hardest part of learning how to trowel. We have the additional problem, the trusses are sitting there in the way. It's better to spray your walls before the trusses are in place, but our timing and weather do not permit that. So I have to push material up under the trusses, because if he sprays it up at the top of the wall, it goes over the wall and sprays inside on the floor. It makes a big mess to clean up. If you do, by the way, spray over the wall onto the concrete floor on the other side, make sure you scrape it up before it gets more than a few hours old. Otherwise, it'll be hard to get off the floor. And once it cures for 3 or 4 days, it's going to take a chisel to get it off the floor. It sticks very well. So clean up your mess early anytime you make a mess. So once again, I'm pushing material up. You got to get material. You tilt the trowel, tilt the leading edge of the trowel higher when you want to move material. You drop the leading edge of the trowel a little bit lower when you just want to smooth out material. At all times, the amount of pressure you push on the material depends on the thickness of the material. With the thin mix, you obviously have to put less pressure, otherwise you'll spread it out too thin. With the thicker mix, you have to put more pressure, otherwise you spread it around too thick. So over time, you'll learn how to do this. Here I am removing the excess SBC from the previous day's spray. We found it's better to just spray up to the edge of the corner and leave it dry overnight with raggedy edges. Then you go back the next day and take the edge of your trowel and simply slice it off by slicing towards the corner with your trowel. It will cut off the excess surface bonding cement. So now I cut it off so when we spray the wall behind my back, then it will smoothly transition into the SBC that we've sprayed the day before. As I get off the ladder, I notice that I didn't do the top corner up there, the raggedy edge. So I go up and take the edge of the trowel and cut off that raggedy edge. So when he sprays up to the corner, then we'll have a nice, pleasant seam. It looks good. You may have noticed as we approach the final corner of this spray sequence that we're getting higher and higher up onto the wall. In other words, we're not spraying the SBC as low down the wall. The reason is we're running out of material. The tub has a limited amount of material, and as we approach this corner, we want to make sure we got the complete corner covered. What you don't want is splatter from this wall that I'm facing right now hitting the wall to my left when you're trying to add the next batch, because there will be a time delay before we can get the next batch mixed and in place. So we increase the height of the bottom of the sprayed material to extend the material to reach to the corner. This will make a much better result. Notice how I'm working in the corners here. The corner, we used to use a special trowel to do the corners. Since we've learned that you don't really need to do that, what you do is push the material into the corner, bring the trowel straight down the corner on both sides of the corner where the trowel corners would touch. Makes a nice seam. Then you work from the corner out towards the wall to get your final troweling in place. Later on, when we do our second and third troweling, this will all smooth up and look very nice. Here we have a patch job going on. The material got a little bit too thin in this corner. We had a bad mix. The mix was too thin. So we put additional material on top of this to cover up the thin spots. You can do this as long as the material is still very wet. Since it was the first troweling, it's still wet enough to work with it. So we sprayed some on there, spread it around, work with it to get it all smoothed out. This mix here was much thicker than the previous mix, and because of that, I spread it around first, and I take and wet the trowel, keep wetting the trowel constantly, and working the new material into the old material, and eventually you get a surface which you cannot see the difference, and it's filled all the thin material, so it's the proper thickness. You may have noticed that while I'm troweling, I work in different directions. I trowel in horizontal motions, I trowel in vertical motions, I trowel in diagonal motions. By troweling in all three motions, you end up getting a flatter surface. Any imperfection that's aggravated by one motion will be cut off by the other motion. Once again, how much you lift the leading end of the trowel depends on how much material you're moving. So if you got a lot of material to move, then you lift the leading edge of the trowel more. Another issue is that the fibers in the material sometimes drag. So if you want to move heavy fibers, you have to put more water in it and do circular motions to work it in, and then you can move that material and the fibers along with it. This all comes from practice, which you'll get through your experience. This is the second troweling, which can be accomplished once the wall is set for a few minutes. The time depends on humidity, sun, things like that, and the wind. But you can see the right-hand side is much smoother than the left-hand side. And you don't have to wet the second troweling. You just work with what's already there. You smooth it around, go in different directions once again to try to fill in any voids and achieve a flat surface. So once again, on the second troweling, you don't usually have to add water. If you wait too long, then you might need some water. But you want it to be like real thick butter at this point so you can get it close, but you still will have trowel marks which have to be removed on the third troweling. Notice in the center of this picture there's a little bubble in the surface bonding cement. That bubble is air that gets trapped underneath the cement between the block and the cement. When you use a wet trowel to try to get a smoother surface, then it forces air in with the water, makes a little bubble. So once the bubbles develop, they usually take a few minutes to develop. Once they develop, then you simply go back, take the edge of your trowel, and pierce the bubble. That lets wait for the air to escape, and then trowel over it, and the bubble will disappear. There's some more bubbles up here at the top. That's done on the third troweling phase. And then if there's any left after that phase, then the sponge takes the tops off the bubbles. In this clip, we're going to show a spray pattern that's pretty close to being ideal. It might just be just a touch on the thick side. This is the way it should be coming out. And this is about 60 pounds in the sprayer. If you use a higher pressure and a larger nozzle orifice, you get more material slung on the wall and less material dripping out the end of the sprayer. Notice we had some material dripping out the end of the sprayer. But it's a good compromise. This point is a good compromise. Material is plenty thick enough to work with. It's easy to spread and get a nice flat surface. And ideally, you'd want all your mixes to be very close to this particular mixture thickness. And you can see this picture, the first pass never gives you the smooth surface that you expect in the end. Here we have the first troweling of an overlap condition. What I mean by overlap is that the material on the left side of the picture was sprayed yesterday. Therefore, it's already set. And we're adding new material to join that seam. So when you add the new material, you have to be very careful to get the same thickness so that the new material height is the same height as the previous day's material. And when you get the thickness the same, then the transition will pretty much sponge out. By sponging, what I mean is after you've done your 3 trowel passes, you let the 3rd trowel pass set for a while, and you come back with a large 6" by 8" sponge, slightly damp, and you rub it across this joint here, and the joint will smooth right out, and the thickness of the new material becomes the same height and thickness as the old material. In other words, the old material acts as a guide and it brushes off the new material down to the same height. So the transition appears nearly invisible if you do a good sponge job. To get even better look, what you can do you can go back later after you sponge it the first time, sponge it again like 10 minutes later. And the damper the sponge, the smoother the effect. The drier the sponge, the more porous the surface effect. So you control the surface effect by how damp you make the sponge while you're sponging the final 3rd troweled surface. Here we're showing the first trowel transition image. At this time you may notice that the previous wall has discoloration. That's because the material takes about 30 days to 60 days to fully dry. At that time it'll all turn white. As I continue to trowel this second troweling of this new material joining the old material, I'm still focused on getting the wall surface flat. I'm not worried about little trowel imperfections. There's a little dent right here. The sponge could actually be taken out later, or you can move material in there by using the trowel the way I just did right now. So it's usually better to fill the voids now. Let the sponge do the light duty, the real minor imperfection work. The sun is shining on this wall this afternoon, and therefore I'm using water on the second pass. So when you use water is totally dependent upon the circumstances. In this particular case, I'm using water to help make the transition smoother between the previous day's surface material and today's surface material. Notice the little swirl motions I'm making. The little swirl motion with a damp trowel, actually a wet trowel, takes off a high spot. As you slide your trowel back and forth, you can feel the high spots. The high spots slow down the trowel when it hits them. So when you find a high spot, you sit there and do the little swirl motion, and that works the fibers and the concrete mix. It works them and smooths them out and gets rid of the high spot. And here I'm going back and forth trying to fill in any little imperfections. Once again, I don't care about trowel marks at this point. I just care about getting the big picture flatness. So every time I see a little void, I try to fill it by moving material into that void. Notice every time I let go of the trowel, every time I come away from the wall, it leaves a little mark. But that doesn't matter because the third pass will usually take all those marks out. So this concludes doing the second pass of troweling on the new adjacent wall material. At this time, I'm waiting for a new mix from my partner. Sometimes the mixing takes longer than the troweling. In this case, I'm waiting for him to show up, and I notice there's a few high spots here, the raggedy edges. So you want to make sure there's no high spots when you shoot your next SBC, otherwise there'll be a lump that you have to deal with. Another issue is always to ensure that the wall is damp. If the sun dries it out, spray a little mist of water on it. Keep the wall damp, that way it doesn't suck the water out of the mix when you spray the SBC.
recording?
What?
Is that recording?
Yeah.
I'm gonna step in front of it.
When working up to a corner, it's a common mistake to not get enough material right at the corner itself. Because if you push on a trowel too much, it will press down and thin it out because there's nothing past the corner to support the trowel. So always make sure you trowel real lightly when you approach a corner to keep the material thick enough. Don't worry about the corner being a raggedy edge. You want a raggedy edge. Like I said earlier in this video, that you go back the next day, take your trowel and cut off the raggedy edge. Instead of try to do it now, you end up with a thin material at the actual corner. You don't want that. You want a strong corner. Notice there's still lumps of material. You can see the lumps and bumps right here. That doesn't matter because the third pass will fill in lots of these lumps and bumps. And then the final sponge pass, the sponge will knock off any high spots and smooth everything out very well. At this time I'm conducting the third troweling pass. The third troweling pass is all about imperfections. You want to remove all the imperfections that you can. Once again, you're not concerned about marks left when you pick up the trowel and leave a mark where the trowel was picked up. The sponge can take those out. But what you don't want is any voids. You want to go back at this time and process any voids by smoothing them over. If you have a void and there's enough material around it to bring it over to it, then you simply wet your trowel, do the spiral motion, and pull that material towards the void like I'm doing right now. Right now I'm taking off a high spot. If you look at it real closely, you can see that only the middle part of the trowel is touching. That means there's a high spot. When the high spot's gone, the entire trowel touches, unless of course your trowel is bent from use. If your trowel is bent a little bit, you have to factor that in to what you observe. So it's all hand-eye coordination at this point. You're trying to get a flat surface that has no imperfection, no dents. If there's a slight mark that's higher, then the sponge will take that off when you do the sponge process. The sponge can also fill a slight void. It's not recommended you do this because to get the sponge wet enough to move the material to fill the void, now the whole material area is too wet and you can't sponge it till you let it set for another 10 minutes and come back and sponge it. So it's better to fill the voids with the trowel on the third pass. If you should happen to miss a void with the trowel on the third pass, you can always wet the sponge, move material with the sponge, give another 10 minutes, come back and do the final sponge in that area. Here I can be seen filling a couple of voids during the third pass troweling. Notice I can work the material adjacent to the void, pull it towards the void. Once again, you work in multiple directions. Work across and then work up and down to make sure it's flat. And you can go around and fill any voids you happen to see. You always miss voids, so when you think you're finished, you stand back and look at it, and you'll find a couple of voids. And this particular section right here is showing how to fix those voids with the trowel on the third pass. As you view these finished walls, you'll notice that there's lots of discoloration. That's because these walls are less than 2 weeks old. It takes 30 to 60 days for the surface bonding cement to fully cure. Until it fully cures, dampness in the air and dampness in the material will cause discolorations. After 60 days, then the material becomes a bright white and it's very uniform. Notice this big spot here at the top of the picture, that real dark gray area. That particular area, somehow moisture got trapped in those blocks and it took like 3 months before that to disappear. In fact, I thought it wasn't going to appear, and then one day I noticed it was gone. So it will eventually turn entirely white once it's fully cured.